Avery Chen was standing in a penthouse that cost more than her childhood home, wearing a diamond ring that could pay off her student loans 3 times over, about to tell the most dangerous man in Manhattan exactly why his billion-dollar deal was about to implode. And the wildest part? 3 months ago, she'd been the clumsy secretary who couldn't even send a text message to the right person. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back to where it all began, the day Avery's entire life changed because of one humiliating mistake. It was 4:47 p.m. on a Friday, and Avery was drowning. Not literally, though sometimes it felt close. She was juggling 3 phones, 2 coffee orders, and a stack of contracts that seemed to multiply every time she looked away. Her boss, Dante Moretti, Manhattan's most ruthless CEO, and according to whispered rumors, connected to something far more dangerous than corporate mergers, had just requested his 4th impossible task of the day. Avery was venting to her best friend Maya through voice message, her phone precariously balanced between her shoulder and ear while she color-coded expense reports with one hand and held a lukewarm latte with the other. "I swear, Maya, this man is going to be the death of me," Avery whispered into what she was absolutely, definitely, 100% certain was Maya's private chat. "He just asked me to reorganize the entire filing system using some obscure Italian business methodology. And the worst part? He's standing there in that custom 3-piece suit looking like a romance novel villain come to life. All sharp jawline and dark, intense eyes that see right through you. I can't even be properly terrified because he's so unfairly, devastatingly hot. Like, criminally hot. It should be illegal to look that good while making someone's life this difficult." She hit send with the confidence of someone who'd triple-checked the recipient. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a building collapses. David from accounting made a choking sound from across the hall. Another assistant actually dropped her entire armload of files. The intern in the corner went pale and started frantically updating his resume like he was evacuating a disaster zone. "What?" Avery looked down at her screen. Message sent to Moretti Executive Leadership, 52 members. Her heart stopped. Actually stopped. The group chat, the one containing every VP, every department head, every single person who held her professional fate in their hands, lit up like a Christmas tree made of career destruction. Marcus from finance, eyes. Jennifer from operations, oh my god. Alessandro, head of security, this should be interesting. And then, the notification that made Avery's blood turn to actual ice. Dante Moretti viewed your voice message. "Oh god," Avery breathed. "Oh god, I'm dead. I'm actually dead." Hey everyone, before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, so you'll be the first to know when the next story drops. Now, let's get into what happened next. The executive floor had gone silent. That terrible, anticipatory silence that happens right before something catastrophic. Every door was cracked open just enough for people to watch, every eye tracking Avery's desk like it was the site of an impending execution. Then she heard them. Footsteps. Not the hurried click of an assistant or the casual stride of a colleague. These were measured, deliberate, predatory steps. The kind of footsteps that belonged to a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. Dante Moretti emerged from his corner office like a storm given human form. At 35, he was devastating in a way that seemed almost weaponized. Dark hair that fell just slightly too long, like he couldn't be bothered with frequent haircuts despite his obvious wealth. Eyes so dark they were nearly black, capable of calculating your net worth and your deepest fears simultaneously. His suit was so perfectly tailored it looked painted on, and his expression, completely, terrifyingly neutral, somehow promised consequences far worse than anger. "Miss Chen," he said, his Italian accent turning her name into something that sounded like both a caress and a threat. "My office. Now." The walk down that hallway felt like a funeral procession where Avery was both the deceased and the mourner. Her mind raced through every possible outcome: fired, blacklisted, forced to move back home to her parents' house and endure their "we told you so" for the rest of her natural life. Dante's office was exactly what you'd expect from a man who ran an empire that was definitely, absolutely, totally legitimate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, and an atmosphere so intimidating even the artwork seemed nervous. He closed the door with a quiet click that sounded like a judge's gavel. "Sit." Avery sat. Her hands were shaking, so she gripped the arms of the leather chair to hide it. Dante didn't sit. He stood behind his desk, backlit by the city skyline, looking like every dangerous fantasy Avery had ever been foolish enough to entertain. "Criminally hot," he quoted, his voice maddeningly calm. "Is that your professional assessment of your employer, Miss Chen?" Avery's throat was desert dry. "Mr. Moretti, I can explain, can you?" He leaned forward, palms flat on the desk. "Because I'm fascinated to hear the explanation for how my personal assistant, the woman I've trusted with confidential files, sensitive schedules, and access to information that could destroy careers, thinks it's appropriate to send voice messages calling me a romance novel villain come to life to the entire executive team." "It was an accident," Avery said desperately. "I was venting to my friend." "I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to click on a chat labeled Moretti Executive Leadership instead of Maya Torres?" Dante's eyebrow arched with devastating precision. "Those seem quite distinct to me, Miss Chen." Avery wanted to disappear. To melt into the expensive Italian leather and cease to exist. I was distracted. "The filing system thing was, the Italian business methodology," Dante interrupted, "is a perfectly logical organizational system used by our international partners. But that's not what concerns me." He moved around the desk with predatory grace, perching on the edge just close enough to make Avery's pulse spike dangerously. "What concerns me," he continued, his dark eyes locked on hers, "is that you think I make your life difficult for entertainment purposes." "I didn't say that, you implied it." His voice was soft, which was somehow worse than if he'd yelled. "Let me clarify something, Miss Chen. I have built this company from nothing. I demand perfection because anything less creates vulnerabilities. I maintain control because in my world, chaos doesn't just cost money, it gets people hurt. And if that makes me a villain in your charming voice messages, then so be it." Avery should have stayed quiet. Should have apologized and begged for her job. But 6 months of biting her tongue, combined with Maya's voice in her head reminding her that silence was just another cage, made her do something phenomenally stupid. She met his gaze directly. "You're right," she said. "You are demanding. You reorganize systems that don't need reorganizing. You color code things that humans shouldn't color code. You probably alphabetize your emotions by intensity level." Dante's eyes narrowed dangerously. "But," Avery continued, her heart hammering, "you're also the only boss who's ever actually trusted me with real work. Who didn't treat me like decorative furniture or assume I was incompetent because I'm young and occasionally clumsy. You actually read the notes I put in your briefings instead of skimming them. You remember my suggestions and sometimes, you even use them." She took a breath. "So yes, you're impossible and terrifying and way too attractive for anyone's professional well-being. But you're also fair, in your own intense way. And I respect that, even when I'm complaining about it to my best friend who I thought I was texting privately." The silence that followed was different. Heavier. Charged with something Avery couldn't quite identify. Dante studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Way too attractive," he repeated slowly. "That's the second time you've commented on my appearance, Miss Chen." Avery's face burned. "I'm very fired, aren't I?" "Oh, you should be," Dante agreed. He stood, buttoning his jacket with precise, controlled movements. "Broadcasting your personal opinions about your employer to 52 people is grounds for immediate termination." "I understand," Avery whispered, already mentally packing her desk. "However, Dante moved to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. I find myself in an unusual position. Avery blinked. Sir? Next week, I'm closing the Castellano merger. A deal worth $500 million that will either secure our position for the next decade or expose us to hostile takeover. It requires absolute discretion, flawless execution, and, he turned to face her, someone I can trust in close proximity at all times. Avery's stomach dropped. I don't understand. I need a personal assistant for the week, Dante said, his voice dropping into something that made Avery's skin prickle with awareness. Someone who will work directly with me, day and night, managing every detail of this merger. Someone who, despite her catastrophic inability to use group chats correctly, has proven she can handle confidential information, think on her feet, and, most importantly, tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable. He moved closer. You want me to? I want you to move into my penthouse for 7 days, Dante said, each word deliberate. You'll have your own room, of course. But you'll be available 24 hours a day. Every meeting, every call, every document, we handle it together. Avery's mind was reeling. This is punishment. This is an opportunity. Dante's eyes held hers. You think I'm a dangerous, impossible boss? Prove you can survive working directly under one. If you succeed, if you can maintain professionalism, discretion, and competence under pressure, I'll triple your salary and promote you to senior executive assistant with full profit sharing. And if I fail? Dante's smile was sharp enough to cut. Then you'll have a very entertaining story about the week you spent living with Manhattan's most demanding boss before he fired you. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Miss Chen? Avery looked at his hand. At his face. At the absolutely insane proposal that should have sent her running for the exit. But something in his expression, a challenge, maybe, or recognition of something equally reckless in her, made her stand and take his hand. Agreement, she said. His grip was firm, warm, and sent electricity up her arm that she absolutely, definitely should not be feeling. But for the record, Avery added, I'm not apologizing for the hot comment. That's just objective fact. Dante's laugh was low and genuinely surprised. This, he said, still holding her hand a moment too long, is going to be very interesting. But what happened next changed everything. The car Dante sent arrived at 5:45 a.m. the next morning, 15 minutes early, because of course it did. It was a black town car with leather seats that probably cost more than Avery's security deposit, driven by a stone-faced man who introduced himself as Alessandro and then didn't speak for the entire 30-minute journey to the Upper East Side. Avery spent the drive clutching her hastily packed duffel bag and trying not to throw up from anxiety. The building was exactly what she'd expected, a pre-war masterpiece with a doorman who looked like he moonlighted for the Secret Service and a lobby featuring actual marble columns. Miss Chen, the doorman said, somehow making her name sound like an indictment. Mr. Moretti is expecting you. Penthouse level. The elevator requires a key. He handed her a gold keycard like he was granting access to a nuclear facility. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, because of course Dante's home required private access, and what Avery saw made her forget how to breathe. The space was obscene. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a 270-degree view of Manhattan. The floors were polished hardwood that reflected morning light like water. Everything, and she meant everything, was perfectly placed. Modern furniture in shades of charcoal and cream. Abstract art that probably came from galleries Avery couldn't afford to enter. A complete absence of anything suggesting an actual human lived here. It looked like a museum exhibit titled, How Billionaires Live. You're early. Avery jumped, nearly dropping her bag. Dante emerged from what appeared to be a kitchen, wearing dark slacks and a white dress shirt with sleeves rolled to his forearms. No tie, top button undone, hair slightly damp like he'd just showered. It was the most casual she'd ever seen him, and somehow that made him more devastating rather than less. You said 6 a.m., Avery managed. I didn't want to be late. Smart. Dante gestured down a hallway. Your room is the second door on the right. You have your own bathroom. I've had everything stocked, but if you need anything, there's a contact list on the counter. You have staff? I have a staff, Dante corrected. But I've given them the week off except for essential deliveries. Security reasons. It's just us. Just us. The words hung in the air, loaded with implications Avery absolutely should not be contemplating. Her room was bigger than her entire apartment. King-sized bed with white linens, more windows, and a bathroom featuring both a rainfall shower and a soaking tub. This is insane, Avery whispered. This is how I live, Dante said from the doorway. Unpack. We have our first meeting in 45 minutes. I'll expect you in the study, last door down the hall, at 6:30. Coffee preferences? Anything with caffeine? His lips twitched. I'll figure it out. The incident happened at 6:47 a.m. Avery had successfully gotten dressed, professional but not trying too hard, black slacks and a cream blouse, and had found the study without getting lost. What she hadn't successfully navigated was the coffee Dante had left for her on a side table. She'd been reaching for the mug while simultaneously trying to read a contract he'd handed her, and her elbow caught the edge of the table. The coffee, expensive-smelling, perfectly brewed coffee, launched itself through the air in what felt like slow motion before landing directly on an antique rug that probably cost more than a car. Oh my God, Avery gasped, dropping to her knees. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Dante looked up from his desk, saw the spreading stain, and went very still. That rug, he said slowly, is a 19th century Persian Tabriz. It's worth approximately $60,000. Avery wanted to die. Actually, physically ceased to exist. I'll pay for it. I'll get it cleaned. You'll stop panicking, Dante interrupted. He stood, moving around his desk with that controlled grace. It's a rug, Avery. An expensive rug, but still just a rug. He crouched beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. This penthouse is a museum, he said quietly. Nothing in it has been lived in, used, touched by anything real. You just made it human. He looked at her, and his expression was softer than she'd ever seen. Stop apologizing. I don't understand, Avery whispered. You should be furious. I should be, Dante agreed. But I'm not. I'm relieved. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. Every person who enters this space treats me, like something fragile and untouchable. You walked in and immediately made a mess. It's oddly refreshing. Avery took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. They were close enough that she could see flecks of amber in his dark eyes, close enough that his cologne was doing dangerous things to her ability to think clearly. I'm still paying for the rug, she said. You're definitely not paying for the rug. Dante released her hand slowly, like he'd had to remind himself to let go. Now sit. We have work to do, and you're already behind schedule. They worked through the morning, Dante explaining the intricacies of the Castellano deal while Avery took notes and asked questions that seemed to surprise him with their sharpness. By noon, Avery had forgotten to be intimidated by the surroundings and was actively arguing with him about a contract clause she thought was vulnerable. This liability waiver is too broad, she insisted, pointing to paragraph 23. If something goes wrong during asset transfer, this language could be interpreted to protect them while exposing you. Dante leaned over her shoulder to read the section, close enough that his breath stirred her hair. My attorneys reviewed this. Your attorneys missed it, Avery countered. Look, any and all circumstances beyond reasonable control is vague enough to drive a truck through. They could claim almost anything was beyond their control and void their obligations. He was quiet for a long moment, reading and rereading the clause. You're right, he said finally. How did my legal team miss this? Because they're looking for obvious traps, Avery said. This isn't obvious. It's subtle, clever, the kind of thing someone would only include if they were planning to use it. Dante straightened, and when he looked at her, his expression had shifted into something intense and almost possessive. You see things others miss. I read things others skim, Avery corrected, suddenly uncomfortable with the weight of his attention. It's not special, it's exactly what I need, Dante interrupted. He moved back to his desk, already pulling up his attorney's contact. This is why you're here, Avery. Not because you're clumsy or chaotic. Because you're sharp enough to catch what everyone else misses. As he spoke rapid Italian into his phone, probably terrifying some poor lawyer, Avery realized something that made her stomach flutter with equal parts excitement and terror. Dante Moretti didn't want her here as camouflage or punishment. He wanted her here because he trusted her mind, her instincts, her ability to see through polish to the problems underneath. And that was infinitely more dangerous than any corporate intrigue, because trust, real, genuine trust, was the one thing Avery had never learned how to protect herself against. The explosion happened on day 3, at precisely 9:47 a.m., over a filing system. Avery had been organizing the Castellano contracts, all 53 versions, each with different amendments, when Dante emerged from his study with an expression suggesting someone was about to die. Where, he said with terrifying calm, is the Henderson addendum from March 15? Avery looked up from the organized chaos spread across his dining table. The Henderson addendum is with the March contracts, filed under H for Henderson. It should be filed under M for March, Dante said. That's the system, chronological, then alphabetical by primary party. You've been here 3 days, Avery. This isn't complicated. Something in his tone, the barely concealed frustration, the assumption that she'd simply been careless, made Avery's own frustration bubble over. Your system is complicated, she countered, standing to face him. It's unnecessarily, pointlessly complicated. You file by date, then party, then document type, then amendment number. That's 4 organizational layers for a single piece of paper. Those layers maintain order. Those layers create vulnerabilities, Avery shot back. Your system is so predictable that anyone with basic access could figure out exactly where sensitive documents are stored. They could anticipate your filing patterns, predict what you'll do next, and exploit that predictability. She gestured to her reorganization. I filed Henderson under H because it's intuitive, but also because someone looking for patterns wouldn't think to check there first. Your perfect organization is a roadmap for anyone who wants to steal from you. Chaos, strategic chaos, is actually more secure because it's unpredictable. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. Dante moved closer, and Avery realized she'd just accused one of Manhattan's most powerful men of having a fundamentally flawed approach to his entire business. You're saying, Dante said slowly, that my system, the system I've used to build a multi-billion-dollar company, is wrong? I'm saying it's predictable, Avery clarified, refusing to back down even though her heart was hammering. And predictable systems get exploited by smart people. Your executives, your competitors, they all know how you think. They can anticipate your moves because you follow the same patterns. She met his eyes. But me? I'm chaotic, inconsistent, which means I'm unpredictable. And unpredictable is harder to exploit. Dante stared at her for a long moment. Then he moved to the table, studying her reorganization with intense focus. He pulled up several files, checking her logic, testing her reasoning. Finally, he looked up. Show me. Show me how someone could exploit my system. Dante pulled out his laptop, opening his firm's digital filing system. If you're right, prove it. Avery moved beside him, her earlier anger transforming into focus. Okay. Let's say I'm Marcus Rossi from finance, and I want to embezzle funds without detection. I know you review financial reports every Monday at 2 p.m. I know you always check the most recent files first, then work backward chronologically. So I bury my fraudulent transaction in a file dated 3 weeks ago, knowing you'll prioritize newer data. By the time you reach the older files, if you reach them, the transaction is already processed and the money's moved. Dante's expression had gone from skeptical to intensely focused. Continue. Your email system follows the same pattern. You respond to priority flags first, then work by sender hierarchy. So I send a legitimate-looking email with a high-priority flag, knowing it'll be at the top of your queue. You open it, maybe approve something routine, and miss the attached secondary document that actually contains the problematic clause. That's happened, Dante said quietly. 3 months ago. A contract amendment I didn't fully review because it came through priority channels from a trusted source. Because your system trains you to trust the structure more than the content, Avery said. Rigid organization creates blind spots. You assume that if something's filed correctly, categorized correctly, it must be correct. But what if someone uses your own system to hide things in plain sight? Dante was silent for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed, short and sharp, but genuine. You're right, he said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. I've been so focused on maintaining control through structure that I created a structure vulnerable to anyone who understands it. He looked at her with an expression equal parts frustration and admiration. How did you see this? Because I've never fit into rigid systems, Avery admitted. I'm too disorganized, too chaotic. So I learned to navigate around structures instead of within them. It's a survival skill when you're the person who doesn't quite belong. Something shifted in Dante's expression. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Before he could respond, Avery's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then groaned. What? Dante asked. Calendar reminder for a meeting that happened yesterday, Avery said, her face flushing. I set the alert for the wrong date. Again. How do you consistently confuse dates? It's a gift, Avery said dryly. Right up there with my ability to spill coffee on priceless artifacts. As if summoned by her words, Avery turned to grab her phone from the table and somehow, she genuinely had no idea how, managed to catch her sleeve on the laptop's power cord. The cord yanked. The laptop tipped. Avery lunged to catch it. She succeeded in saving the laptop but crashed into Dante in the process, sending them both stumbling backward. Dante's arms wrapped around her reflexively, steadying them both. For a suspended moment, they were pressed together, Avery's back against Dante's chest, his arms locked around her waist, both breathing hard. I saved the laptop, Avery said weakly. You nearly killed us both, Dante countered, but there was something in his voice that wasn't quite anger. His breath was warm against her ear. Avery became hyper-aware of everywhere they were touching, his chest against her back, his arms around her waist, his hands splayed across her ribs. I should probably let go, Dante said quietly. Probably, Avery agreed. Neither of them moved. Then Dante's phone rang, shattering the moment. He released her immediately, stepping back to answer with his usual clipped professionalism. Avery fled to the bathroom, where she pressed her palms against cool marble and tried to remember how to breathe normally. 3 days. She'd been here 3 days, and she was already having moments with her boss that felt like something out of a romance novel. When she returned, Dante was off the phone and had reorganized the contracts using a hybrid of his system and hers, chronological with strategic chaos elements. This, he said, gesturing to the new organization, is better. More secure, less predictable. He looked at her. You're right more often than you're wrong, Avery Chen. That's unsettling. Why unsettling? Because I've spent 10 years building systems designed to eliminate variables and uncertainty. And you walk in and prove that uncertainty might actually be my best defense. His expression was complicated, frustrated but also intrigued. You're the variable I didn't account for. The chaos I didn't plan for. And somehow, you're exactly what I need. Avery's heart was doing dangerous things. Is that a compliment or a complaint? Both, Dante said. Definitely both. Day 5 arrived with thunderstorms that turned Manhattan into something from a noir film, all shadow and rain-slicked streets and atmospheric drama that felt appropriate for Avery's current emotional state. They'd been working for 14 hours straight, preparing for preliminary meetings with the Castellano representatives. Dante's dining table had become war room central: contracts, financial projections, enough coffee cups to caffeinate a small army. At 11 p.m., Dante finally leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his palm in a gesture so uncharacteristically vulnerable that Avery felt something crack in her chest. "Take a break," she said. "You're going to burn out before the actual meeting." "Can't afford to burn out," Dante replied. But he didn't reach for another document. Instead, he stood and moved to the windows, watching rain streak down the glass. "This deal has to close. There's no alternative." Avery joined him at the window, maintaining careful distance. "What happens if it doesn't?" "Best case, I lose $500 million and significant market position." Dante's jaw tightened. "Worst case, there are people who've invested not just money but reputation in this deal. If it fails, they'll view it as betrayal. And people in my world don't forgive betrayal." "That's why you're so careful," Avery said quietly. "Why everything has to be perfect, because imperfection isn't just costly, it's dangerous. You understand." Dante glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "I grew up poor," Avery said. "Not struggling middle-class poor. Actually poor. The kind where you learn to count every dollar because one mistake means you don't eat that week. You learn to be careful because carelessness has consequences." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Different world than yours, but I get it. The need for control. The fear of what happens when things slip." Dante turned to face her fully, his expression intense. "How did you end up working for me?" "Student loans, mostly," Avery said with a weak laugh. "Turns out a liberal arts degree and charming personality don't pay Manhattan rent. I needed a job that paid enough to survive, and Moretti Global was hiring. I figured I'd last 6 months, pad my resume, move on." She met his eyes. "That was 6 months ago. Why did you stay?" "Because you were interesting," Avery admitted. "Everyone said you were impossible, demanding, terrifying. But I watched you work, and I realized you weren't cruel. You were careful. You demanded perfection because the stakes were real. And that made sense to me in a way nothing else in corporate Manhattan did." Thunder rumbled outside. Rain intensified against the windows. Dante moved closer, close enough that Avery could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that never quite released. "I haven't been surprised by another person in years," Dante said quietly. "Everyone in my life wants something. Money, power, access, protection. They perform versions of themselves designed to appeal to what they think I want. It's exhausting and isolating and entirely predictable." "And then I sent that voice message," Avery said. "And then you sent that voice message," Dante agreed, his lips twitching. "Calling me criminally hot and terrifying, like you genuinely couldn't decide if you wanted to kiss me or run from me." "To be fair, I still haven't decided," Avery said without thinking, then immediately wanted to die. I didn't mean, I know exactly what you meant," Dante interrupted, his voice dropping into something lower, more intimate. "Because I have the same problem." Avery's heart hammered. "You're chaos incarnate, Avery Chen. You spill things, break things, reorganize my entire life with your beautiful, frustrating unpredictability. You should drive me insane. But you're the first real thing I've encountered in a decade," Dante finished. "You don't perform. You don't calculate how to appeal to me. You just exist, honest and clumsy and brilliant and completely, utterly yourself. It's terrifying and addictive in equal measure." They were standing too close now, close enough that Avery could feel the heat radiating from him, see the precise moment his gaze dropped to her lips before jerking back up to her eyes. "Dante," she whispered, and it was a warning or a plea, or both. "I know," he said roughly. "This is inappropriate, unprofessional. You work for me. You're living in my home." "I have no right." "You have every right," Avery interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "I'm here by choice. I stay by choice. And if I'm honest, which apparently is my defining characteristic, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that voice message. Not as my boss. As you." Dante's control visibly frayed. His hand lifted, hovering near her face like he was fighting the urge to touch her. "If I start this, I won't want to stop. I'm not good at casual, Avery. When I want something, I become obsessive, possessive, completely insufferable." "I've seen you obsessive," Avery said, her voice shaking slightly. "I work for you, remember? I know exactly how intense you get. And I'm still here." "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Avery closed the remaining distance between them, looking up at him with challenge and invitation combined. "I'm saying I'm tired of pretending this is just professional. I'm saying I see you, not the CEO, not the reputation, but you. The man who reorganizes filing systems at 2 a.m. because he can't sleep. Who secretly reads my margin notes and uses my suggestions. Who laughs when I'm clumsy instead of getting angry because you're just as lonely as I am, and you're tired of pretending otherwise." Dante made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. "You're going to destroy me." "Probably,"